For years, Hungary has been a thorn in the European Union's side, regularly going against convention. With a war raging on European soil, cooperation is more important than ever. So, why doesn't Hungarian President Viktor Orban toe the line? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Viktor Orban is Hungary's longest-serving president. In order to stay in power, Orban has undermined key institutions, putting him at loggerheads with the European Union. But is his long-term strategy paying off?
One of these leaders is not like the others. Viktor Orban had until recently blocked the equivalent of $54 billion in funding for Ukraine. But this time, he acquiesced.
In the end, we found a solution, an agreement, a good agreement. We are not sending weapons to Ukraine. We get our money from Brussels and we will contribute to the civil financing of Ukraine.
Brussels released over $10 billion of blocked funds to Budapest, but another $10 billion is being held back because of Hungary's breaches over the rule of law. Orban has a history of breaking with the EU. He met Russian President Vladimir Putin after the war in Ukraine had started. He's not in favor of tough sanctions against Moscow and said any curbs on importing Russian nuclear energy would be a red line for Hungary. He's also the last holdout in ratifying Sweden's NATO bid, and EU allies are frustrated.
We have Orban fatigue now here in Brussels. We have so many things to solve. I can't understand, I can't accept this very strange and very egoistic game of Viktor Orban.
Orban has been in office since 2010, having served a 4-year stint as president in 1998. His Fidesz party is right-wing, nationalist, socially conservative, and Eurosceptic. Polls suggest similar parties across Europe will do well in EU elections later this year. And there's a strong possibility Donald Trump may be back in the White House, meaning the political landscape will shift to the right. But Hungary receives billions in funding from Brussels and so is only willing to rock the boat so much. Another showdown is brewing, though, over Orban's new defensive sovereignty law, which Brussels says breaks EU democracy and freedom of speech legislation. With more future friction ahead, can the Union continue to find consensus?
Let's meet our guests. In Budapest is Andras Laszlo, former advisor to the ruling Fidesz party. In Cambridge, in the UK, is Paul Ingram, executive director at British American Security Information Council. And here with me in the studio is Thomas Lorman, lecturer in the history of Central Europe and the Hungarian political landscape at University of London, School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies. Welcome to all of you. Andras, I'll start with you. I see that a recent biography of Viktor Orban was called Man of Chaos. He seems to love creating chaos and putting out this narrative that he's the man to fix the problem.
He is one, I would say, rather a point of stability in Hungarian politics. He's been in Hungarian parliament since 1990, since the change of regime of socialism. And he stayed in politics even in years of opposition and now in government for more than a decade now, since 2010. So if anything, he's a point of stability in Hungarian politics.
And what's his domestic popularity like? If you stop a Hungarian person on the street and say to them, what do you think of Viktor Orban? How popular is he?
He's, I think, the number one politician in the country, or in the top two. He's very popular, and the entire government is very popular for its pro-family policies, for its tough stance on illegal immigration. And of course, it was re-elected, the conservative majority in 2022 was re-elected with a message of wanting peace and staying out of the Ukraine war. And these are very popular policies ever since, for a long time, and that gives a lot of credibility and stability for this government.
So we look in from the outside and we see a guy who seems to be politically quite muscular when it comes to dealing with other European Union countries, the West in general, but it certainly plays well to a domestic audience, correct?
Yes, because he doesn't sign up to, let's say, a progressive mainstream that you would usually see from Western governments. He's not shy to fight political battles, whether it's domestic or international. And obviously that creates a lot of frustration from liberals and socialists across Europe. But it also means a lot of praise from conservative from around Europe and also across the Atlantic.
Paul, I'll come to you. I mean, he's the longest serving leader of the 27 nations in the European Union, but does Viktor Orban have an issue with being isolated by the others at the moment?
I seriously doubt it. I think, if anything, it plays into his agenda. There is a problem, I think, with the type of politics that we have, which seems to encourage this way of strongman politics and being clear and unwavering in one's perspective, particularly if it means locking up one's opponents or taking over the judiciary or having a very tight control of the media. I think there is a problem in Europe. It's not the problem that it's run by a bunch of lefties. I think if anything, Europe is becoming more like Viktor Orban rather than Viktor Orban becoming more like Europe.
So you don't see him as a problematic leader for the rest of the European Union countries then?
Oh, I do see him as a problematic leader, just as Trump is a problematic leader, and a number of other populist leaders, which misunderstand the nature of democracy. It's not just about the rule of some kind of majority knee-jerk reaction. It's about listening to one another. And I think many of the criticisms that we've heard just now about some people on the more progressive end of the spectrum within Europe is justified. I think this is a culture war problem that where the blame lies on people across the spectrum. We do need to actually grow up more and listen to one another. And the one thing I would congratulate Viktor Orban on is his tendency to try and listen to countries and and leaders that come from a very different tradition, such as Putin. We do need to be listening and understanding what Putin is trying to say, but it doesn't mean that we need to be caving in or doing what Putin thinks is the right thing.
Thomas, I'll come to you. We've heard mention there of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. With the Trump issue, I mean, Orban has said on the record that he warmly welcomes the prospect of Trump 2.0 coming back into the White House. Why would he want Trump in? Just explain that to us.
Well, the tensions between Orban and the Democratic Party in America go back a long way. Barack Obama essentially banned Orban from visiting the White House, at which point Orban responded by supporting Trump because he assumed Hillary Clinton would pursue what he regarded as unfriendly anti-Hungarian policies. And then this is followed on, of course, with Biden being again perceived as very critical of Hungary. And so it's a deep-rooted tension between the Democratic Party and Orban, which has partly pushed him into the Republican direction. It's also the case that he finds some policies of the Republicans sympathetic, and he likes their muscular conservatism. So, and they like him. So it's a mutual love affair between the Republicans and Orban, but he's also pushed in that direction by problematic diplomatic policies of both the Obama and the Biden White House.
And talk to me where he stands on the whole Putin issue. So he's obviously he's the friendliest European leader towards Putin, yeah?
He is, but it reflects his own political view about countries having a right to defend their national interests. That's one. The second thing is that the Hungarian relationship with the Ukrainians is bad. And partly it's because they're worried about the way that the Hungarian minority is being treated in the Ukraine, which is fairly discriminatory in the legislation, and partly it's because Orban senses that the wishing away Russia, as if somehow Putin will disappear and the Russian invasion of Ukraine will stop, is naive. And Orban prides himself on tough realism rather than what he sees as liberal fantasies.
Andras, I'll come to you. You're in Hungary. What's your take on what you've just heard about Orban and why he's, leaning towards Putin and not a fan of the Ukrainians?
I would say he's the least hostile leader towards Russia, simply because he's not doing foreign policy based on ideology, but doing foreign policy based on Hungarian interests, and as we've just heard, based on realism. the lesson here is that, geopolitics are not going to change. Russia will stay in the neighborhood as a big country, as a big power. It doesn't seem like it's going to collapse anytime soon. And obviously, he takes these big countries, not only Russia, but also Ukraine, Poland, Germany, and from the south, Turkey, very seriously. And he said this in many speeches, that in order to determine the future of Hungary and what are the opportunities for Hungary, these powers and these capitals need to be taken into account. And that's exactly what he is doing.
And just tell me, the issue of Ukraine, how does this play domestically in Hungary with people on the street? Other European cities, we've seen great support for the Ukrainians. And Orban, we've seen him try to block aid, for example.
The issue is that, as I said, at the general elections in 2022, the promise made towards the Hungarian electorate was that Hungary would not be drawn into this war, and the Hungarian government would resist any such attempt. But Hungary has supported Ukraine since the beginning with humanitarian aid, with fuel, with helping refugees leave the country as soon as possible, provide assistance to them, etc. So Hungary wants a normalized relationship with Ukraine, but obviously Ukraine, in a situation where it is under attack, wants enthusiastic allies and maximum support from every direction. And obviously Hungary is looking out for its own interests. I think Hungary will want normal relations with Ukraine, and it's since we are two neighboring countries, having normalized relations will be in the interest of both sides. Obviously, until the war is going on, it's a very different situation. It creates tension simply because the kind of political debate you have in the US about stopping the war and trying to end the war or keep fighting the war is not taking place at European level. And Orban is one of the few leaders in Europe who wants to have this debate, who wants to talk about peace and peace prospects and what that would look like. And for example, at the last EU summit, when there was a 50 billion euro package approved for Ukraine, he wants to ask questions, and he wants to debate the fact that, okay, what is exactly our strategy? How are we going to help Ukraine with what we're doing? And what is the end game? How do we get out of this war? And other European leaders simply do not want to have this kind of discussion.
Paul, that's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the coverage of Viktor Orban in the Western European media is that here is a guy who's a blocker, an obstacle, and someone who's constantly looking to cause problems. But from what we're hearing, he very much is putting Hungary first. Is that a fair assessment?
In the last couple of months, he actually said that he is ready to support and provide more support to Ukraine. He just wants to talk about the how and why, because when we're talking about 50 billion euros, which would be a joint EU loan, which would be for 4 or 5 years ahead, without any kind of conditions, without how that money will be used, without what the situation will be, let's say, in Ukraine in 6 months, we're taking decisions 4 or 5 years ahead. And he just said we need to have a strategy debate.
Paul, yeah, I'll come back to you, Paul. Have we got this guy wrong?
So I think that we have got the management of Orban wrong. I do think that that Orban is raising some interesting questions here around how we ensure that Ukraine is accountable. There's been a very black and white approach towards the war, which I think has been damaging. So I think, if anything, this is the issue that I would have most sympathy with Orban on. And that's quite dangerous to say something like that, because we live in a political culture where you either criticize or support somebody. It's very black and white. But I think in this respect, Orban is actually quite sensible. I think in many other respects, if I were living in Hungary today, I would be in the opposition. I have no doubt about it. I do not have sympathy for his agenda, his domestic agenda, and I am fearful for the direction of travel that most of Europe is going on, Hungary included, when it comes to some of these ways of blaming immigrants and the rest. But I think if we focus, as you are asking, on the issue around Russia, I do think that there is a tendency to think you're either for or against, and that this is a very black and white issue. And I think having Orban there could, at some point, be an asset for Europe if we see him as a bridge to Putin.
Thomas, I want to read to you a quote. Viktor Orban recently gave an interview to Wolfgang Schüssel, former Austrian Chancellor. It was for European Voices magazine. He says, "We Europeans are not strong enough for the Russians to take us seriously. This is a power play. This is a war." Has he got a point? Do the Russians take Europe seriously enough?
Well, there's definitely the case that, as most experts would agree, Europe has not spent enough on defence. It hasn't adopted a tough, clear enough foreign policy direction. The old question that if you want to speak to who's in charge of European foreign policy, who do you call, remains pertinent. On the other hand, Orban is part of the European Union, and he has to find ways of working with them, and that's part of the challenge. So it's a little bit, I think, excessive of Orban to criticise the European Union for being weak, when in some sense that responsibility is shared across the board. And it's a problem for Europe because it hasn't worked out really what it wants to do and how much it wants to spend. It's done the easy work of encouraging Europeans to be opposed to the war in Ukraine. It hasn't done the hard work of saying how much money needs to be spent in Ukraine to defend Ukrainian sovereignty. So Orban points to problems. I think the larger thing I wanted to stress here, though, is that Orban likes a battle. He's liked it right from the beginning. He liked battling against Budapest elites. He battled against the Communist Party before 1989. He condemned corruption in the 1990s into the 2000s. He battled against the Social Democrats. Now he battles against the Brussels elites. He likes a fight. And sometimes we like his fight when we think he's doing the right thing. And sometimes we don't like him fighting when we think he's doing the wrong thing. But it's in his nature. And I think expecting Orban to be entirely conciliatory, whether towards Brussels or to anybody else, would be mistaken. He likes a clash. That's what gives him energy.
Andras, is that a good assessment of Viktor Orban, someone who gets a buzz out of the political brawling, if you like?
I put it in a mildly different way, is that he's not afraid of clashing. Most conservatives around Europe are afraid of what media headlines are going to be after they say something or vote in some kind of way. They're afraid of being approved or not approved. And Orban can rely on a very solid majority in parliament in Hungary, on a very big popular support in Hungary. And he thinks very simply in terms of representation. He says that this is what my voters think, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to fight the battle if necessary. And he, in fact, calls very often on popular support in his international battles, mostly with the European Union, on legislation from migration. There was a referendum to LGBT issues and gender ideology into schools. He's not shy of fighting these battles if necessary.
Paul, just looking ahead, at some point this year, next year, there has to be peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. I mean, it's a bloody stalemate. Nobody is winning. Do you think there is the opportunity for Viktor Orban to perhaps be the negotiator or the peacemaker between the two?
I would hope so, because we need as many peacemakers as we can get. I'm doubtful whether the Europeans and certainly the Ukrainians would see Orban as the or an effective mediator, because he has shown, for their liking, too much sympathy for Putin, which I think is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the Europeans see that as a negative thing. I think we still have a more likely interlocutor in Turkey than we do in Hungary today, would be my assessment.
Thomas, just give us your assessment of Orban as a potential peacemaker between the two.
Yeah, I agree with Paul's assessment there. And I don't think Orban sees himself really, that's not his position, is to be the grand mediator. I think what he sees himself as being the truth teller, as someone who points out the dilemmas. But as Paul notes, he's not there. I'd note here that how Orban develops is uncertain as well, because he's been in office now continuously for 14 years. In fact, he had 4 years before that. So really, he's been prime minister for 18 years. It's a long time. but 14 continuously since 2010. And we're seeing some tiredness coming in. Not him personally, he retains that energy, but in his government, some tiredness, some mistakes, some problems that are emerging. The president had to resign, former Minister of Justice. Orban has got challenges that he has to deal with domestically to keep control and move on to the necessary next election victory. So I think his focus will be on sorting out those problems domestically rather than attempting to shift towards a foreign policy perspective and honest broker, when Turkey could play that role much more effectively.
And Andras, just looking forward to July, Hungary will be chairing the European Commission presidency for 6 months. How big a deal is that, do you believe, for Orban?
Well, Hungary already had the first presidency of the Council of the EU back in 2011. Everyone was also hysterical back then. Oh, what's going to happen? It's a new government which just took office back then, only a few months prior to that. Now the tune is very different. There's a liberal leftist majority in the European Parliament, which is absolutely hysterical about the prospects of Hungary doing the presidency in the second half of this year. I think coming back to the previous question on how this is going to play out in terms of Ukraine, because I think that's mostly what people are concerned about when it comes to the Hungarian presidency, is that the EU is not in a position to negotiate over Ukraine, unfortunately. Ukraine has become, I share this position, a victim of great power rivalry, and it has become a battleground. And for this war to come to an end and to find some kind of sensible solution, it's the US and Russia which are going to have to negotiate. And I highly doubt that the EU will play any kind of role in this. And in this sense, it won't be much to the Hungarian presidency to solve this problem. I think the Hungarian presidency will mostly have to be focused on what comes after the European elections in June. What are the new majorities? What is a workable majority in the parliament? And of course, there's going to be a new commission, which will need to be elected in autumn. I think most of the pressure, most of the tension will be around the formation of the new commission. And this will be the primary task of the Hungarian presidency.
Paul, do you think the presidency is an opportunity for Viktor Orban to perhaps prove a few doubters wrong?
I think it's really difficult to tell at this stage. I mean, we have already seen Viktor Orban make a very strong stand on Ukraine and then step back at the last moment. And I fear that there are some within Europe who will draw the conclusion that the way to handle Viktor Orban is to stand up to him, come what may, and that is a negative approach, whoever you're dealing with, because it encourages conflict and confrontation. I don't think it's necessary, and I think it would be harmful to Hungary and to the rest of the European Union if we just see Viktor Orban as a deeply problematical person to confront at every stage. I think there is an opportunity here to try and find some compromise and middle ground, and I hope that this 6-month presidency will be an opportunity for that.
Thomas, how long will he keep ruling for? 14 years is an incredible stint by anyone's standard. I mean, if you look in the UK, we had one Prime Minister, Liz Truss, bless her, she lasted 6 weeks.
It's true, but Orban still has the energy, and critically, his party can't afford to lose at the moment. The opposition would want to wreak revenge on what they perceive as his abuses, real and imagined. His party needs to win, and I think there's every chance they can go on winning, but it needs to work harder on it, because at the moment a little bit of sloppiness and arrogance has crept in. So I think Orban himself shows no interest in slowing down. He's still the most energetic politician in Hungarian politics. And I think his party is well set to win the next elections as well, but it will require work. And just very, very briefly, if I could just return to the Ukraine thing. I think we talk about Orban as a potential broker. No one in Ukraine at the moment is publicly talking about a peace deal, regardless of the situation, nor are they really in Russia.
It has to happen. It has to happen.
well, wars can go on for a very long time. There's an excellent biography of the Vietnam War called the 10,000-Day War. First World War, which appears pretty fruitless from a historian's perspective post the initial combats, still went on for 4 years with immense casualties. I am very skeptical that we will see an attempt, and I think at the moment it would be political suicide for anyone in the Kiev government or the Moscow government to talk about a peace deal which would give up their objectives at the moment. Now, you're right that wars very often end in peace treaties, but often those peace treaties come when one side really feels that the only alternative is complete collapse. We're not there yet.
Paul, Andras and Thomas, thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.